Today is the first Sunday of Lent, and we're going to be talking about prophecy, temptation, Satan's perspective, the true meaning of Lent, Saint of the Day, Saint Francis of Rome, and the miracle discussion on the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano. Getting into the readings, we start with Deuteronomy, where we have a thanks to God for leading the Jews out of the desert, leading them to this land of milk and honey. It talks about how they should kneel and worship and be thankful for everything that God has given them. Next, we had a reading from Romans, reinforcing our faith in God, letting us know that if we believe in God in word and deed, that we will be saved, and it's not just extended to Jews now. Everyone is the chosen people. Everyone has a chance to be saved. After this, we get into the gospel, and this gospel is one of the most interesting and one of the most intimate gospels in relation to the life of Christ and getting to know Christ, because this is where we have the temptation in the desert. At a high level, Jesus goes out into the desert to be tempted. Satan comes and gives him these 3 different temptations. He's out there for 40 days and 40 nights, and he overcomes the temptation. Very fitting for Lent, obviously, as we're doing this 40 days of Lent, and the message there of being able to overcome temptation, relying on Scripture. All of that's very important. And I'm sure your priest talked about that, my priest talked about that. But this story of being tempted in the desert is a lot bigger and broader and more impactful than this, incredibly so, and has been very interesting to look into and think about, specifically thinking about this, as odd as it may sound, from Satan's perspective of what's going on here and the significance of this meeting in the desert. Because from Satan's perspective, he was cast out from heaven, and as revenge to God, he is going to doom humanity to sin through temptation, and he does that with Adam and Eve by convincing them that God is not fully trustworthy. He doesn't fully have your best interests at heart. And so he dooms humanity, gets them cast out of the garden, and introduces sin into the world. And it's there that we have our first prophecy, where God tells the serpent that a descendant of Adam and Eve would do battle against him in the future. From there, Satan battles against God for control of humanity through subversion and temptation and sin, and God attempts to redeem humanity through different things like animal sacrifice or doing different offerings, and even flooding the world and putting a reset button on humanity in general. But Satan's grasp and evil nature still permeated through the world and had a grip on humanity. So he's probably feeling pretty good about himself. But then these prophets start to come about, and they're talking about who is to come, the one who is to come, the Messiah, the Redeemer. And Satan's hearing all this, and he's not omniscient. He doesn't know everything. Only God knows everything. But he's always watching, he's always listening, and he's hearing about all these different prophecies and about this person who's going to come. And over time, it gets more and more specific, right? That it's going to be from the house of Judah, the line of David, born in Bethlehem, born from a virgin. And we kind of know the general time frame in which this is going to happen. And probably the most chilling of all to Satan is a prophecy from Zechariah, who says that this one who's to come will redeem humanity in a single day. In a single day, he will undo thousands of years of work of Satan undoing and redeeming humanity. So he's on high alert. He's on the lookout for this Messiah. And then Jesus is born, fulfilling all these different prophecies. Satan's taken notice. Satan wants to do everything that he can to stop this Messiah from redeeming humanity. And so he gets in King Herod's ear right after he's born and tells him to kill all the newborn babies so that another king doesn't rise up to take his place. And so he does, which also unwittingly fulfills another prophecy. And as we know, Jesus escaped. He was not killed. And now from the sidelines, Satan is watching Jesus grow up. He's looking for signs that this is indeed the person that he's been waiting for this whole time. And then finally, at Jesus' baptism, God announces that this is my son with whom I am well pleased. And Satan knows, okay, this is the guy. And now I've got one chance to go to work on him and to get him to be separated from humanity. And for a task this important, he actually is going to show up in person, which is pretty rare. Satan doesn't show up in person very often, but in this case, with Jesus, he knows he has to. And we know that God agrees to it. This is a sanctioned fight, because as it says, Jesus was led into the desert to be tempted. So he's not just going there for no reason. He's not just going there to fast for no reason. He's specifically in the desert to be tempted. And this is a good reflection of the Adam scene, right? Adam is in this very beautiful, lush garden, and Satan tempts him and he fails. Well, as we know, Jesus is the new Adam, And he's not in a very lush garden. He's not around all these animals that are great and kind and that he has dominion over. He's among the wild animals. And where Adam doomed humanity through sin, Jesus is here to redeem humanity. It's the epic rematch of Satan versus humanity. And his one goal is to get in between humanity and God, cause Jesus to fail, and in doing so will lose the last shot at redeeming humanity. Because if the Son of God can be corrupted, if the Son of God can fall into sin, what hope do you and me have? So, all that in mind, Satan goes to tempt Jesus. And everyone has like their own interpretation of what the three different temptations mean. If it's like temptation of the flesh and temptation of the mind, everyone has kind of their own thing. I don't plan on getting that complicated with it. The first temptation is for Jesus to turn a stone into bread because he's been fasting for 40 days. He's pretty hungry. If you've seen that painting of Christ in the desert where he just looks burnt out and miserable, because this is probably very difficult. His body is at a weak point here, but he rejects the temptation and justifies that right by quoting scripture. Next, Satan takes Jesus and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and promises that they can be his if he should simply worship Satan. Is an interesting note, too, that Satan considers the kingdoms of the world to be his to hand over, which sort of reinforces that idea that he has dominion over humanity until Jesus comes and redeems it. And this is a particularly interesting and I would say kind of compelling temptation from Jesus' perspective. I used to always think, it's like he's offering him all this money and kingdoms and everything. And you would think that Jesus would just say, I don't need any of that. The idea of him is he's very humble, very lowly, very detached from the material world. But there is kind of a second side to this because, again, Jesus knows all the prophecies, Satan knows all the prophecies. They both know that in the future, all of the nations of the world will bow down to Jesus. All of them will be his. But the cost to get them will be very high. He'll have to give up his life, death on the cross, which he is definitely not looking forward to. I said at the beginning that this is a very intimate moment with Jesus during these temptations, and the only one maybe more intimate than this is going to be Jesus praying in the garden just before he is handed over. Because we learn from that, we know that Jesus does not want to die. He does not want to go through all the pain and suffering and the public death on the cross. Who would? And so he's pleading with God, please don't make me do this. Don't make me undergo this torment. If there's any other way, please, let's do it that way. But of course, it ends in obedience, your will, not my will. And we know that he's extremely stressed out by this too because he's sweating blood in the garden, which is a real phenomenon that happens and has been observed with death row inmates just before they're executed. So the amount of stress his body's under in that moment is extreme. And here, he knows that's going to happen. He knows that's what it's going to take. But again, like always, he says, no, we worship God and God alone. And then finally, Satan kind of goes back to his old bag of tricks and takes Jesus to a very high place, tells him, jump and surely the angels will come and save you, as it is written, because Satan knows the scripture as well. He's very well versed in the scriptures also. And this type of temptation is the exact same kind he used against Adam, which is to try and get a little kernel of doubt in your head to say, well, maybe God's not fully trustworthy. Well, maybe God won't always come and save you. Maybe there's something there where this guy isn't quite everything that he has told you that he is. And so he's kind of goading Jesus in that way, saying, come on, don't you believe? Go ahead and jump, unless there's a reason you don't believe. But of course, Jesus rebukes him yet again, quotes scripture yet again, and overcomes the temptation through mostly, a lot of it is humility, right? He has faith and trust in God, humbling himself, knowing God's will, which is really the only way to truly overcome temptation. There's a great quote that I like that, as far as I can tell, is attributed to Moses the Black, and it goes like this. You fast, but Satan does not eat. You labor fervently, but Satan never sleeps. The only dimension in which you can outperform Satan is by acquiring humility, for Satan has no humility. And that's exactly what Jesus demonstrates here. The only way to overcome temptation is to be humble, hand yourself over to God and God's will, and rely on the scriptures. And with that, Satan is defeated. This epic rematch, this epic battle, the last shot that Satan has to get his hooks into humanity permanently is over. He lost. At this moment, Satan loses. It's over. He knows who Jesus is. He knows what's going to happen. His last and best shot to get at him has failed. The new Adam has arrived to redeem humanity, and there's nothing he can do about it. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this verse, these readings, are some of the most consequential and important in the entire Bible. This is the fulfillment of the scripture, or at least a large part of it, and a direct confrontation between Jesus and Satan where Satan loses. And it can't just be written off as like, well, Jesus is God, of course he wins. You got to remember that he is 100% human as well. He has human temptations, human desires. He is a human being, but he is also God. So it's not like an asterisk next to the victory or like a caveat. Well, he's Jesus, so he won as a human. And what this kind of teaches us is that a human being who is committed to God and has handed himself over to God's will is more powerful than the greatest angel who is against God. Us lowly humans have the power to overcome Satan because the only tool that he has is through subversion and temptation. There's nothing he can do directly to you to cause you to sin. He can't make you do anything. He can only tempt you. Now, there can be lots of temptations from lots of different sources bombarding you all the time. It's kind of how it is today, but that's all he's got. And so, recognizing that and recognizing the moments of temptation and falling back on this example of how to overcome it is important. Another aspect here that I think is worth touching on, again, from the perspective of Satan, is how Satan does quote scripture in order to try and lead Jesus to sin. And that's something that we have to look out for in our daily life, is there are a lot of people who know the Bible very well. It's not like it's a secret book or anything. You can go buy it anywhere. You can read it online. It's fully available to everyone. And so you have to look out for the people quoting scripture in order to lead you astray or justify sin. Beware the false leaders. Because, like I said last time, there's no quicker way for you to lose control of your life, your movement, your religion, anything like that, than to have someone who says the right things and maybe is like 75% on your side to get into a position of power or leadership. And then they will gradually lead you astray over time. And before you know it, very subtly, you're completely off course. So you have to be vigilant against that. But also in your own life, you do have to look out for trying to quote scripture or something like that to justify your own sin. People do it, or they fall back on like technically he never said this, or well, technically the Bible doesn't say this. And so you got to be careful about justifying your own sin and your own bad decisions through the writings of the Bible or maybe omissions, which can be easy to fall into. Last thing I want to talk about here, as far as the readings are concerned, are about Lent in general. Like I said, this is the first Sunday of Lent, the start of the 40 days, where you're being asked to refocus your priority on Christ, take stock of and examine your life and figure out, where am I headed? Where's my focus right now? What am I putting into my faith and what am I expecting to get out of it? It is a lot of reflection of essentially, how serious are you taking this, right? Is this just something you go to on the weekends? Is it just something you do to appease your family? Do you actually believe this? Are you actually invested? Are you actually willing to commit your life to this, to Catholicism, to Christ? And that's both publicly and privately, because you do need to have a private prayer life and private dedication to God. But also in public, Lent and Ash Wednesday and everything, this is some of the most visible time of the Catholic Church to the world. It's the most attended day of Mass in the world. And it is sort of the point where everyone's looking at Catholicism. And so having that dedication and knowing why you're doing what you're doing is important for everybody else to see. Because you don't want them to look and just see like, oh, they put the ashes on their heads so they can post something on social media, or they don't eat meat for some reason, or they give something up. That's the whole thing about Lent, is you give something up without having a deeper understanding of what's going on, or not being able to see that understanding through you and through other Christians, right? Of the real meaning and the real
Our saint of
dedication
the day
of the
discussion is
Lenten
on
season.
Saint Francis of
And be sure to
Rome.
comment and
And
let
she
me
is
know
a
what
great
your
example of
Lenten
how your
sacrifice
call
is
to
this year.
holiness can exist both inside the home and outside of it in priesthood or religious life. She was born in Rome in the 1300s to a very wealthy and noble family, and from a very young age, she felt called to the religious life, and she wanted to become a nun and serve God that way. However, as was the custom at the time, being a young woman, she was arranged to be married. At first, she fought against it. She did not want to do it, but her father had the final say in this matter, and so at the age of 13, she was married. And for a while, she really struggled with that. She became ill for a while and really felt that this was not her calling and was longing for that life of servitude in the covenant. But eventually she had the realization that by this longing that she has, she is trying to do her own will, right? She's trying to go her own direction and not letting God steer her where she's supposed to be. And so she transformed her life, she transformed her home into her mission. As a wife and a mother, she still devoted herself to serving the poor, serving the sick, again, all the while maintaining the household and raising children, which does kind of come to show that any of us can achieve the same thing that she did. Any of us can be saints because it's not confined to the monastery or the nunnery or anything like that. It can be found in the family. And luckily for her, the person she was married to, a very wealthy, influential person, was very supportive of her and her goal. Whenever she would go and give money or clothing to the poor and sick, even without permission, she would do these things. He never was upset, never was angry, fully supported her devotion to God. And even though she was part of this very wealthy, noble family now, she did still have some tragedies of her own. She did lose 2 of her children to the plague. However, she never lost her resolve in God and went on to found a group of laywomen called the Oblates of Mary. And these were women who would, again, serve the poor and the sick of the area in Rome without necessarily being part of a convent or any sort of religious order or taking any vows or anything, but it was normal women just like her taking on that role. And she was so in tune with God's will that there were some reported miracles to happen around her. It was reported that her guardian angel would be visible and make a visible appearance to her and would guide her. And there's one story where she says she was walking alone at night down the dark streets, but it said that a heavenly light came and illuminated her path. All in all, she is a great example of how you can serve God and find holiness and even sainthood in the ordinary in your day-to-day life. Even if you are a parent or a spouse, you're raising kids, doing whatever, there is still that opportunity there to do more and serve God. You don't have to go and become a priest or become a nun or anything like that. You can do it in your daily life. Because ultimately it is a choice. Because she could have chosen to go live among the noble and the wealthy and spent her whole life doing that, but she chose to bring herself to those who need her, the poor and the sick, the needy, and she is the patron saint of widows, mothers, and hospital workers. A great example for all of us. The miracle discussion today is going to be the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano. And when it comes to miracles in the Catholic Church, I think few are as important as Eucharistic miracles. And this one is no exception. This one is kind of interesting because it's said to have happened in the 8th century, somewhere between 730 and 750, though there was no actual record of it occurring until the 1500s. And the story goes like this. We're in Lanciano, Italy, and there is a monk performing the Mass, and this monk has doubts about the true presence, has doubts that the bread and wine truly do become the body and blood of Christ. And whenever he's performing the Mass and he says the consecration, this is my body, this is my blood, the bread and wine do truly, before his eyes, transform into flesh and blood. The bread turns into actual tissue, and the wine turns into blood that then coagulates into 5 different little globules. It was then said that the monk took possession of the relics and kept them within his order until around 1175, which then they were given to the Benedictine monks, where they kept it in the Church of St. Francis at Lanciano. It was moved around a little bit, but today that's where it is. And these relics have been scientifically studied a few times. It says the first time was in 1574, where an archbishop was weighing these clots, these blood clots, and he said it was odd because each individual clot, because there's 5 total, each individual one weighed the same as all 5 together, which is not physically possible, but that's what he said, is that each individual one weighs the same as all 5 together. And then almost 400 years later, in the 1970s, the actual flesh was analyzed, where it was revealed that the flesh was human heart muscle tissue. And that's a detail that, as you'll research more Eucharistic miracles, that's kind of a consistent detail, is that it's always this heart muscle tissue. And I believe that these are on display currently. The Catholic Church officially recognizes it as authentic. I know Pope John Paul has went to visit this before as well, and it is a testament to the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And isn't it just crazy that stuff like that happens? I mean, there are so many skeptics out there, whether it's atheist or agnostic or whoever, or even just like non-Catholics, skeptics of the Catholic Church and its authenticity, particularly around the true presence. But skeptics in general of like, where's the proof? Where's something I can hold in my hand that God exists? All that type of thing. when there is stuff like this that happens, miracles didn't just happen in the Bible. Stuff happens consistently from then till now. Purely unexplainable, supernatural phenomenon that seems to be isolated for the most part within the Catholic Church. Just something to think about, something interesting. But with all that said, that is what I have for today. Do let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments. Was there anything that I missed in the readings? Let me know what your Lenten sacrifice is. Don't forget to rate the episode, and I will see you in the next one.